You haven't seen these historical photos yet? Write your opinion in the comments. On November 22nd, 1963, Jacqueline Kennedy stood beside the car carrying President John F. Kennedy after the attack in Dallas. Her reported words, "Let them see what they have done to Jack," became one of the most remembered lines from that night. In Berlin in 1946, a family carried home a care package through streets still filled with broken buildings after the Second World War. By the end of 1947, more than 200,000 care packages had reached Berlin, bringing rare food like coffee, chocolate, milk powder, and sugar. In 1939, unemployed men sat outside Ottawa civic offices, holding signs that asked for work and relief during the Great Depression. Their protest shows how Canada's job crisis reached city halls, as many families depended on public aid for basic food and rent. On May 25, 1953, a 280mm cannon fired the W-9 atomic artillery shell over Frenchman Flat in Nevada. It produced a 15-kiloton flash and became the only atomic artillery round ever fired from a cannon, a Cold War test that still looks unreal on film. In 1972, Italian guest workers and their families returned to Wolfsburg Station after Christmas visits home, carrying suitcases and parcels beside the train. Many of them worked for Volkswagen, and their children grew up between Italian family life and West Germany's factory towns. In 1917, while Russia's army was falling apart, Maria Bochkareva formed a female volunteer battalion and marched them to the Eastern Front. Their shaved heads, rifles, and strict discipline were meant to shock tired soldiers into fighting again, but the experiment lasted only a few months. In the Great Plains during the Dust Bowl, children went to school with lunch pails, books, goggles, and cloth masks instead of ordinary school gear. The dust storms could darken daylight and slip into homes and classrooms, turning a normal walk to class into a survival routine. In 1972, psychiatrist John E. Fryer spoke at an American Psychiatric Association meeting as Dr. Anonymous, wearing a mask and wig to hide his identity. His speech helped push the profession to stop treating gay people as mentally ill, at a time when being open could cost him his career. On May 28, 1945, Staff Sergeant Barnacles shaved at a small mirror while his Okinawa camp stood deep in floodwater. His raised table and hanging towels show how Marines kept routine during the final weeks of the Pacific War. In 1945, Ira Hayes, a Pima Marine from Arizona, pointed to his place in the famous flag-raising photograph from Iwo Jima. He was one of the 6 men in the image, turning a battlefield moment into one of the most recognized American photographs of the war. In December 1988, Polish mine rescuer Krzysztof Murawski photographed rescue teams working through the ruins after the Armenian earthquake. The disaster brought rare foreign help into Soviet Armenia, including mine rescuers trained to search unstable spaces in freezing conditions. On May 28, 1945, British soldiers captured William Joyce, the radio voice known as Lord Haw Haw. For years, he opened German wartime broadcasts with Germany calling, making that phrase one of the most recognized sounds of enemy radio. On April 28, 1988, Aloha Airlines Flight 243 landed on Maui after a large part of its cabin roof came open at 24,000 feet. 19 years of short island flights had weakened the aircraft's skin, yet 94 of the 95 people on board survived. Around 1982, Chris Niedenthal photographed Polish troops on a Warsaw street during martial law in the Polish People's Republic. The wet road, rifle, and military trucks show how an ordinary city corner became a guarded zone overnight. In June 1992, a Bosniak father and son stood among the ruins of their home during the first months of the Bosnian War. The photo captures one family's private loss inside a conflict that turned ordinary houses and streets into front lines. In the 1600s, plague doctors wore long coats, gloves, and beak-shaped masks that made them look almost unreal. The beak was often filled with herbs or scented material, because many doctors believed bad air could carry illness. At Ellis Island in the 1910s, these Dutch women were photographed during the long entry checks into the United States. Their regional caps made them stand out in a place where officers decided each day which newcomers could enter America. In 1921, Tulsa's Greenwood district, known as Black Wall Street, was left in ruins after one of the worst racial attacks in United States history. This street had once held homes, churches, schools, and businesses built by a thriving black community. In 1931, Lavrenti Beria held Stalin's daughter Svetlana, while Stalin and Abkhaz leader Nestor Lakoba sat behind them in the Caucasus. The quiet family scene is disturbing in hindsight because Beria later became head of the NKVD and one of Stalin's main tools of political repression. In Kina, Egypt, in 1954, officials displayed a baker after he raised bread prices during a Nile flood shortage. The scene shows how one loaf of bread could become a state matter when hunger, prices, and public anger met in the street. In 1915, French soldiers used this hand-built trench catapult because a thrown grenade often could not reach far enough from a protected position. Before small trench mortars became common, such devices let crews launch grenades over parapets while staying lower in the trench. On April 28, 1943, Soviet Petlyakov Pa-8 bombers used the first serial 5,000-kilogram air bombs against fortifications near Königsberg. Each bomb was so heavy that only large, long-range bombers could carry it, making this one of the most extreme Soviet air weapons of the war. In 1913, 10-year-old Sarah Rector received a 160-acre allotment in Oklahoma that was considered poor land. Oil was found beneath it, and the child, once given unwanted soil, became one of the richest black girls in the United States. In 1992, a mob demolished the Jain temple in Lahore after the Babri Masjid was destroyed in Ayodhya, India. The site was part of Pakistan's small Jain heritage, and its loss came during reprisals that also affected Hindu communities in Karachi. On May 5, 1945, a Japanese Fugo balloon weapon reached Oregon and caused the only enemy action deaths on the United States mainland during the Second World War. Near Bly, a woman and 5 children found the device in the woods, unaware it had crossed the Pacific by wind. In 1918, Georgia Tech hosted a football game while many spectators wore face masks during the influenza pandemic. The crowded stands show how public life continued even as cities tried simple rules to slow the spread. This pre-1947 card lists Al Capone as Alphonse Capone, alias Al Brown, with number 5527 and a noted facial scar. The top stamp says Master Dead, showing the file was later marked after his death, but kept as a permanent fingerprint record. On December 20th, 1944, Lieutenant Francis S. Ford climbed out after crash landing his P-38 Lightning at Hill Field on Mindoro. The fighter had returned from combat with damage, turning a Philippine airstrip into the last stop of a mission he survived. In 1917, First World War prisoners stood behind barbed wire, with one man's eyes covered and another facing the camera in worn field uniform. Prisoners could spend months or years in camps, where guards controlled work details, food lines, letters, and identity records. In 1876, 14-year-old Carolina Olsson of Okno, Sweden, reportedly went to bed and stayed in a sleep-like state for 32 years. When she returned to normal life in 1908, doctors still had no clear answer, and newspapers called her the Sleeping Beauty of Okno. Geli Raubal was Hitler's half-niece and widely reported to have been his lover while living in his Munich apartment. In 1931, she died there at age 23, making their relationship one of the most discussed scandals around his rise. In Harbin in 1903, Japanese agents Yokokawa Shozo and Oki Teisuke were caught after entering Russian-controlled territory dressed as Buddhist lamas. Russian troops executed them as spies, months before open war began between Japan and Russia. In Srinagar in 1969, this woman was photographed with advanced Hansen disease, then still widely known as leprosy. By that time, doctors knew it was a bacterial illness, but many patients still faced isolation, fear, and lifelong stigma. In Dane and Loška Dolina, Italian soldiers line up Slovenian civilian hostages during the Second World War. The image documents a wartime reprisal under Italian occupation, when villagers could be selected and executed for resistance activity in the area. Between August 1988 and June 1989, Tsutomu Miyazaki abducted 4 children in Tokyo and Saitama, creating one of Japan's most notorious criminal cases. The image on the right shows his hand condition, a detail often mentioned in reports about the investigation and trial. Okinawa, 1945. Marines found 10 Korean girls near a Japanese quartermaster area, and the original caption says they had been sold for sexual exploitation. The photo shows how poverty and Japanese wartime control could move Korean girls far from home into military zones. Ella Williams was promoted as over 8 feet tall and performed for decades after first working as a live-in housekeeper. She toured Europe and Australia, sang as a soprano, and continued performing into her early 60s. In 1958, 16-year-old Leslie Arnold showed Nebraska police the backyard site where his parents were buried. He received a life sentence, escaped after 10 years, and was identified only decades later after living in Australia under another name. Sylvia Porter was a sideshow performer known for a medical condition that caused extreme swelling in her legs and feet. She spoke proudly about her work and defended other performers as traditional sideshows began disappearing from public entertainment. In 2007, a United States Apache helicopter filmed this group in Baghdad before firing on them. The 2010 WikiLeaks release exposed the deaths of Reuters journalists Namir Noor El-Din and Saeed Shmah, while no crew member was charged. Werner Braune stood at Landsberg Prison on June 7, 1951, after conviction in the United States Einsatzgruppen trial. His unit was tied to the Simferopol massacre of December 1941, and he was one of the few Einsatzgruppen defendants whose death sentence was carried out. In Ohio in 1946, psychiatric patients sat in a state hospital before modern antipsychotic medicine became widely used. Many American hospitals then relied on long stays, strict routines, and crowded wards instead of the treatments used today. In 1988, an injured man escaped from Robert Berdella's Kansas City house and told a meter reader he had been held captive for days. His escape led police to a case that exposed Berdella as one of Missouri's most notorious serial criminals. In 1988, an injured man escaped from Robert Berdella's Kansas City house and told a meter reader he had been held captive for days. His escape led police to a case that exposed Berdella as one of Missouri's most notorious serial criminals. On February 6, 1934, far-right groups fought police near the French National Assembly in Paris. The riot forced Prime Minister Edouard Daladier to resign and became a major warning for French democracy. In 1999, 15-year-old Rachel Barber was lured in Melbourne by her former babysitter with a fake, paid psychology study. Carolyn Reed Robertson had copied Rachel's handwriting, collected her details, and planned to step into her life under a new name. On June 14, 1941, Soviet authorities began taking Baltic families from Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania and loading them onto deportation trains. By 1953, more than 130,000 people had been sent east, often to Siberia, with children looking out from rail cars like this. On September 1, 1980, a British soldier took position in a West German village during Reforger 80, NATO's drill for a possible Warsaw Pact attack. The woman and child at the fence show how Cold War military exercises often happened directly beside ordinary homes. This Boeing B-17, named 5 Grand, was the 5,000th flying fortress built at the Seattle plant after Pearl Harbor. Every factory worker signed its metal skin and pilots said the extra paint made it fly about 7 miles per hour slower. Lotte Toberenz ran the Uckermark camp for girls and young women labeled as asocial or non-conforming in Nazi Germany. In 1948, she was acquitted for lack of evidence and later worked in the German police, making this mugshot especially disturbing. In 1948, Life magazine photographed women from the Vietnamese Hoa Hao movement training in the jungle during the First Indochina War. They practiced with swords, spears, and rifles for a French-aligned unit, showing how local religious groups became armed forces in the conflict. On November 4, 1979, Iranian students climbed into the United States Embassy in Tehran and began the hostage crisis. 52 Americans were held for 444 days, making this gate one of the most tense symbols of the Iranian Revolution. On March 2, 1998, an ethnic Albanian protester lay on a Pristina street as tear gas spread during clashes with Serbian police. The photo captured Kosovo just before the conflict widened, when street protests were already turning into a national crisis. On March 27, 1977, two Boeing 747s collided on a foggy runway at Tenerife after radio confusion and a failed takeoff clearance. 583 people died, making it the deadliest aviation accident in history and changing cockpit communication rules worldwide. In 1934, Swiss photographer Balkan claimed this object near Meiringen was the legendary Tatzelwurm after it moved when his camera flash went off. The photo was taken seriously enough for Berliner Illustrierte Zeitung to organize a search, but the creature remained an unsolved alpine legend. In 1916, Mexican rebel Fortino Samano stood before a firing squad during the Mexican Revolution with a cigar still in his mouth. His calm pose made the photo one of the most recognizable final portraits from that conflict. In March 1954 at Dien Bien Phu, wounded French soldiers were rushed into a Douglas C-47 Skytrain while Viet Minh artillery hit the airfield. Soon after, the runway became unusable, leaving the surrounded garrison dependent on dangerous airdrops instead of evacuation. On December 7, 1941, smoke rose over Pearl Harbor as Japanese aircraft struck ships around Ford Island in Hawaii. The attack brought the United States into the Second World War and turned this harbor into one of the most studied battle sites in American history. In 1913, Walburga Österreich began an affair with 17-year-old Otto Sandhuber and hid him in her attic while her husband lived below. When her husband died in 1922, Otto stayed hidden for years until the secret attic lover was finally discovered in 1930. In 1977, college students Teresa Jentz and Lori Goldman were camping near Klein Falls, Oregon, when a truck drove over their tent at night. Both survived a second attack with an axe, but no one was arrested, leaving the case as a disturbing, unsolved camping crime. In 1940, this man was given a lobotomy after doctors recorded that his constant worry kept him from holding a job. The before and after photos were presented as medical proof, showing how casually a life-changing brain operation was once promoted. In 1912, 21-year-old Guadalupe Campos was registered in Ciudad Juarez with a health inspection card and a monthly fee listed on the document. The card shows how local officials tracked women in the sex trade by name, photo, payments, and medical checks. In 1945, a Dutch woman had her hair cut off in public after being accused of a relationship with a German soldier. Across liberated Europe, this punishment was used to mark women as collaborators, often before any formal trial. On April 14, 1889, Father Damien was photographed on his deathbed at Kalaupapa on Molokai after years caring for people with Hansen disease in Hawaii. He had chosen to live among isolated patients, built homes and chapels for them, and later developed the same illness himself. In Moscow in 1956, Maria Gavrish kissed Elena Kovalenko after losing to her in a Soviet breaststroke final. For elite Soviet swimmers, one race could decide medals, status, and a future place on the national team. In Bydgoszcz, on September 9, 1939, German troops executed the first group of Polish hostages sentenced after the city was occupied. The staged public shooting was meant to intimidate residents in the first days of Nazi rule in Poland. On May 9, 1955, Hiroshima survivors Mitsuko Kuramoto and Emiko Takemoto met reporters at Mitchell Air Force Base on Long Island. They were among 25 young women brought to New York for reconstructive surgery. 10 years after the atomic bombing changed their faces and lives. In the Netherlands in 1945, a woman stood beside an off-course German V-1 flying bomb that had landed without exploding. The weapon was meant to hit cities, but this one ended nose down in a pasture, still dangerous even in silence. William Patrick Farrell lunged at photographer Al Amy from a police van after being accused in the Ann Yarrow case in New York. Police said the 25-year-old had twice been a Bellevue patient and was sent back there after his arrest. On Christmas Day, 1929, North Carolina farmer Charles Lawson killed his wife and 6 children after sending his eldest son Arthur away on an errand. These photos show the home, bedroom, funeral, and newspaper coverage of a case later tied to rumors of a hidden family scandal. On May 19, 1962, Dutch singer Ria Kuiken was grabbed by a trained circus bear during a rehearsal at Circus Tony Boltini in Almere. Photographer Kik de Boer captured the exact moment, and the image later won a World Press Photo Award. In 1911, Sergei Prokudin-Gorsky photographed 2 chained prisoners outside the Bukhara Zindan, a prison in the Russian Empire's Central Asian frontier. The color image shows the leg irons, guards' rifles, and mud walls of a jail that was closed only after the fall of the Bukhara monarchy. In 1977, Dutch Marines stormed a hijacked train at DuPont after a 20-day hostage crisis led by South Moluccan militants. About 15,000 rounds were fired, leaving the train skin covered with impact marks and turning the rescue into one of the Netherlands' most controversial operations. Dollars and Marion Price, sisters from Belfast, were convicted for their role in the 1973 Old Bailey bombing in London. The attack hurt more than 200 people and showed that the Northern Ireland conflict had reached the heart of England's capital. In 1969, Black Panther leaders Fred Hampton and Mark Clark were killed during a Chicago police raid, helped by informant William O'Neill. Police fired nearly 100 rounds, while investigators later found only 1 shot came from inside the apartment. In 1996, Rita Kemper escaped Joe Metheny in Baltimore, and her report led police into one of Maryland's most disturbing criminal cases. Metheny later claimed 13 victims and said he had sold roadside burgers made from human remains, a confession that made the case infamous. In 1942, actress Carol Lombard, her mother, and 15 servicemen died when their plane struck Potosi Mountain in Nevada. Her husband, Clark Gable, searched for her wedding ring, but it was reportedly found only in 2023 with the inscription, "All My Love, March 29, 1939. This arrest photo shows Rudolf Heuss, former commandant of Auschwitz, after British forces found him hiding under a false name in 1946. He was later tried in Poland and executed on April 16, 1947, near the camp he had once commanded. On October 17, 1989, the Loma Prieta earthquake collapsed sections of Oakland's Cypress Freeway, trapping cars inside the double-decker structure. 63 people died across the disaster, and the ruined freeway became one of the clearest warnings about older concrete roads in earthquake zones. On March 9, 1976, a cable car in Cavallese, Italy, fell about 200 meters after its support cable failed. 43 people died, including 15 children, and 14-year-old Alessandra Piovesan was the only survivor. Aloysia Veit, a relative of Hitler, was placed in a psychiatric institution after a suicide attempt and later became a victim of the Nazi euthanasia program. Her case is disturbing because the same regime built around Hitler also targeted people from his own extended family. In 1984, followers of the Rajneeshi movement in Oregon contaminated salad bars with salmonella, to keep local voters away from the polls. More than 700 people became ill, making it the largest recorded bioterror attack in United States history. On December 21, 1988, Pan Am Flight 103 broke apart over Lockerbie, Scotland, after a bomb was placed on board the Boeing 747. All 259 people on the aircraft and 11 people on the ground died, making Lockerbie Britain's deadliest terrorist attack. At the Pamintahan massacre in Lipa, Philippines, in 1945, Eusebio Linatok was assigned number 406 before Japanese troops marched civilians from the seminary. He survived by staying silent after severe wounds, and his testimony later became evidence in the Yamashita war crimes trial. In May 1946, Katie Starks survived 2 gunshot wounds to the head during the final attack linked to Texarkana's Phantom case. Her husband Virgil died in the farmhouse, and the suspected killer was never convicted, leaving the city's most feared case unresolved. Nikolai Kobalkov, born in Russia in 1851 without arms or legs, became a famous performer known for shooting, painting, and writing with remarkable control. He later ran his own attraction in Vienna's Prater Park and even appeared in an early silent film. In Gwangju in 1980, South Korean troops arrested citizens who protested military rule after Chun Doo-hwan seized power. The uprising became one of South Korea's defining democratic wounds, remembered for the civilians who faced soldiers in the streets. In 1935, Evelyn Smith, a former striptease dancer, was jailed after being hired by a jealous woman to kill her lover. The case drew national attention because Smith hid the remains in a swamp, turning a paid crime into a notorious tabloid story. In 1945, these two views show Nagasaki before and after the atomic bombing, with the same harbor framed by the surrounding mountains. The lower image shows how one blast erased entire districts, while ships, hills, and the bay still mark the same city. In 1956, at Berlin's Avis track, Porsche's one-off Type 645 prototype flew off the steep banked curve during its first race. Driver Richard von Frankenberg survived after being thrown clear, but the magnesium-bodied car was destroyed and the project ended. In the 1970s, FBI profiler Robert Ressler was locked alone with Ed Kemper when the prison alarm button failed. Kemper saw his panic and calmly told him the guards would not come for several minutes. In Montevideo in 1923, police used a mannequin dressed in an unidentified woman's clothes after her body lay unnamed for 21 days. Crowds gathered at the shop window until one passerby recognized the outfit, turning a display into the break in the case. In 1982, Deborah Scaling Kiley and Brad Kavanaugh survived 5 days on a small raft after their yacht sank in the Atlantic. Out of 5 crew members, only 2 lived, and Kiley later turned the ordeal into the book that inspired Two Came Back. Between 1915 and 1926, encephalitis lethargica left some patients awake but unable to move, speak, or fully respond. More than 500,000 people were affected worldwide before the illness faded, and its exact cause is still uncertain. In 1895, Irish woman Bridget Cleary was killed after her husband Michael claimed she was not his wife, but a fairy changeling. Michael Cleary and 3 others were jailed, turning an old folklore belief into one of Ireland's most infamous criminal cases. On June 4, 1944, this B-29 broke apart after ditching in the Bay of Bengal when its fuel transfer system failed. 7 of 11 crewmen were rescued, and 1 survivor can be seen clinging to the number 1 engine. John Gilmore, known on stage as Zandu, was born in Iowa in 1912 with sacral agenesis and learned to move by walking on his hands. He became a sideshow performer and electric guitar player, turning a rare condition into a public career instead of a private limitation. In New Mexico in 1916, men posed on a newly built gallows prepared for 6 Villistas convicted after the Columbus border raid. That raid pushed General John Pershing into Mexico, turning one frontier attack into a major United States military expedition. In 1960, Venezuelan President Romulo Betancourt survived this car bomb attack in Caracas, with his damaged vehicle visible on the right. Investigators later tied the plot to Dominican dictator Rafael Trujillo, and the failed attack helped turn other governments against him. On October 25, 1944, this tiny dark shape was a Japanese Zero diving toward USS Kitkun Bay in Leyte Gulf. It was part of the first organized kamikaze attacks, when pilots turned aircraft into weapons against Allied ships. Around 1900, fishermen at Port Chalmers, New Zealand, displayed an 18-foot shark on a cart for a public crowd. The scale of the animal turned a routine catch into a street spectacle, with men standing on its back for the photograph. In 1931, the Hawke's Bay earthquake shattered Napier and nearby towns, leaving streets split, buildings collapsed, and fires spreading through the ruins. 256 people died, and the rebuilding turned Napier into one of the world's best-known Art Deco cities. In 1960, 18-year-old Francis Forsyth entered the Old Bailey after a robbery attack that killed 23-year-old Alan G. in London. He was later executed for capital murder, making him one of the youngest people put to death in 20th century Britain. On July 24, 1913, a Mongolian prisoner was photographed wearing a wooden kangway locked around his neck. The board restricted movement, made eating difficult, and turned punishment into a public display. On February 9, 1996, the IRA ended its ceasefire by bombing London's Docklands after an 18-month pause. 2 people died, more than 100 were injured, and the blast signaled that the Northern Ireland conflict had returned to London. Jean-Claude Ramon spent 18 years pretending to be a World Health Organization doctor, while his family believed he had a real medical career. In January 1993, as the lie was about to collapse, he killed his wife, children, and parents before setting the house on fire. On February 3, 1976, armed men seized a school bus in Djibouti with 29 French children and their chaperone inside. The crisis ended near the Somali border after a French rescue operation, turning the small bus into one of France's most studied hostage cases. On October 23, 1952, a New York City subway train crashed near Mosholu Parkway, leaving cars twisted across the elevated tracks. The wreck became one of the Bronx's worst transit disasters, with rescuers climbing through crushed steel above the street. On February 3, 1998, Carla Faye Tucker became the first woman executed in Texas since Chipita Rodriguez in 1863. Her case drew national attention because she said she had changed in prison after a 1983 burglary case that left 2 people dead. In February 1970, Marine Lance Corporal Charles C. Seed carried an elderly Vietnamese woman during a patrol southwest of Da Nang. She could not keep up through the war zone, so the soldier from Ohio lifted her onto his back and kept moving. In 1985, French defendant Georges Courtois turned his own robbery trial into a 36-hour courtroom standoff after weapons were smuggled inside. He held judges and jurors in Nantes, while claiming he wanted France to see how the justice system treated him. In 1945, Japanese soldiers inspected the wreckage of a United States B-29 superfortress shot down during an air raid on Tokyo. A bent Browning M2 machine gun lies in front, showing how violently the aircraft broke apart before hitting the ground. Canadian sailors pulled this German submariner from the Atlantic after depth charges sank U-448 on April 14, 1944. Most of his crew was lost, and the oil on his uniform shows how close he came to going down with the submarine. This was Marilyn Monroe's bedroom in Los Angeles on August 5, 1962, after police entered the room where she was found. The unmade bed and scattered objects became part of one of Hollywood's most examined final scenes. In Hungary in 1989, police dragged a young Viktor Orban into a car during the last months of communist rule. The same man later became prime minister, making this photo a rare look at him, before power, facing the state from the other side. In São Paulo in 1946, these Shindo Renmei members targeted Japanese Brazilians who accepted that Japan had lost the Second World War. Their attacks left 23 people dead and 147 wounded, all because they called the truth of surrender a betrayal. On May 26, 1958, the Yellowwood nuclear test lit the horizon at Eniwetok Atoll with a yield of 330 kilotons. It was expected to reach 2.5 megatons, but the much lower result turned this blast into a failed thermonuclear design test. In 1952, Dwight Eisenhower broke down while speaking to veterans about the men he sent into the Normandy landings. The commander who planned the invasion could still barely hold back tears 8 years later. On December 24, 1971, 17-year-old Julianne Köpke survived a fall from a broken plane over the Peruvian rainforest while still strapped to her seat. She walked through the jungle for 11 days before rescue, becoming the only survivor of a crash that killed 91 people, including her mother. In Seoul in 1971, police stopped young men in public to check whether their hair was too long under government appearance rules. Those who failed the inspection could have their hair cut on the spot, turning style into a public act of control. On October 10, 1941, captured Soviet soldier Krutov left a farewell note that was later found by search teams near Vyazma. His words turned one prisoner's final hours into a surviving record of fear, hunger, and refusal to disappear from memory. In August 1941, a German aircraft photographed the breached Dnieper hydroelectric station dam after Soviet forces destroyed it during the retreat. The opened wall sent a massive flood down the Dnieper, making this one of the war's most destructive scorched earth actions. On April 16, 1945, USS Laffey survived 4 bomb hits and 5 kamikaze impacts off Okinawa. This damaged gun position shows why the destroyer was later called the ship that would not die. On April 7, 1990, the ferry Scandinavian Star caught fire during an overnight voyage between Norway and Denmark. In just 45 minutes, 158 people died, and the disaster forced major changes in ferry safety rules. On October 25, 1943, Luftwaffe officer Heinz Schweitzer worked on an unexploded Allied bomb in western Germany with only a hammer and chisel. The photo shows how bomb disposal in the Second World War could depend on steady hands more than advanced tools. In Poznan, in 1938, Irena Bobowska was a young Polish poet in a wheelchair, later joining the resistance after Germany occupied Poland. She was executed in 1942 at age 22, after telling her judges that one day they would face a higher judgment. On March 17, 1893, Morton Street in New York showed the hidden problem of horse-powered cities. Streets filling with waste faster than workers could remove it. In the 1890s, experts feared major cities could be buried by horse waste until automobiles replaced one urban crisis with another. In 2001, a wedding celebration in Jerusalem was being filmed moments before the dance floor suddenly collapsed 2 stories down. 23 guests died, and about 380 were injured, turning a crowded reception into Israel's worst civil disaster. In 1994, 26-year-old Anna Nicole Smith married 89-year-old billionaire J. Howard Marshall, creating one of the most talked-about celebrity marriages of the decade. After Marshall died 1 year later, a $1.6 billion estate battle lasted for years, but Anna Nicole never received the fortune. In 1940, the Nazi leader returned to the trench sector near Fromelles in northern France, where he had served as a messenger in the First World War. The visit came after Germany defeated France, turning an old battlefield from his youth into a propaganda stop for the new occupation. In the late 1800s, this ascetic wore a metal frame fixed around his neck as part of an extreme religious vow. The frame made lying down almost impossible, turning sleep itself into a daily test of discipline. In Lapland in 1943, Wehrmacht soldiers dressed in bras and skirts for a unit entertainment show during their remote Arctic posting. The Bundesarchiv photo shows a rarely seen side of the front. Barracks humor used against months of cold, boredom, and isolation. Write your opinion about these historical photos in the comments.